I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast a real expert on terrorism and also on American foreign policy. This is Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Addicott. He's a professor of law. He's a director of the Center for Terrorism Law. For a good bit of his career, he was a senior legal advisor to the U.S. Army Special Forces. He's testified multiple times before Congress. He's been all over the media. He's a prolific author who's written more books and monographs and articles than I can count. His latest, Global and National Security Law, Assessing the War on Terror. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Debbie and I were watching, this is just a couple weeks ago, the really terrific film Fallen Angel. Yep. And we right toward the end of the movie, there's Jeffrey Addicott. You were interviewed in the movie, so I thought I'd start by asking you about, that whole thing was just so bizarre and so intriguing. The very same SEAL team that had dispatched bin Laden is conducting an operation. Mysteriously, it appears to have veered off course. It seems to have been in the air longer than it was supposed to, and what was supposed to be a very brief operation becomes a catastrophe in which all these Navy SEALs and some other military guys, a couple of Afghan troops are killed. A disastrous event for the SEALs. Talk a little bit about that, and is there anything new that we know about that, and will we ever know what really happened there?
Well, it's an outstanding film, and I encourage everybody to see it. It's called Fallen Angel. It happened 10 years ago. Time flies, but as you indicated, SEAL Team 6, just 3 months earlier, had killed Osama bin Laden. Now they're in a forward operating base just south of Kabul, and they had a mission along with some Army Rangers to capture a top Taliban leader in a particular area. And the Rangers went on one side of the valley. The Navy SEALs got in a Chinook. And there were 38 people in that Chinook that day, and they were coming in from the other side about 2 o'clock in the morning. And the greatest loss of special forces in our history occurred at that time, when we believed that an RPG took the helicopter and all lives were lost. There's a lot of unanswered questions, as you indicated, about what really happened. That's what this film's about. I did, appear in the film as a subject matter expert on rules of engagement, because I can speak to that. The rest of the issues about the forensics and why were the bodies, not brought back as they should have been? Why were they cremated? The missing black box, was there one? These are all questions that are in that movie. It's a fantastic movie, very powerful. But from my perspective, we had an opportunity because we had a C-130 gunship that was above the valley at that time. This is at night. But they had eyes on the target of some of the bad guys that were fleeing down the valley. These are enemy combatants. Under the law of war, you have every right to kill them. However, because of the rules of engagement, now rules of engagement are things that we self-layer on top of the laws of war. They're political rules, basically. People say, well, they're the military rules of engagement. I guarantee you, nobody in the military wants to operate on rules of engagement that restrict their ability to use lawful violence against the enemy. So these are politically imposed. But at that time, the rules required that the gunship get permission from higher headquarters to shoot at the enemy on the ground. As unbelievable as that sounds, that's what they had to do. Permission was denied. And therefore, the same group that they could have killed apparently is the same individuals that shot that Chinook out of the sky, killing 38 people, the majority of them Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6. So you go the what ifs, what if we were able to kill those individuals in the law of war? Would that have occurred? My opinion, no, it would not have occurred, because they would not be there to kill them if we killed them first.
You made a critical distinction I want to highlight, and that is between the laws of war, which are international, I believe with their roots going back to early theoreticians in the Middle Ages, and subsequently the idea, for example, that you can't deliberately target large numbers of civilians and vaporize them. Laws of humanity and that are codified into the laws of war. But you're saying that is completely different from rules of engagement. And it seems like going back to the Vietnam War, we can think of various ways in which essentially the US has fought wars by tying one hand behind its own back, right? In other words, you can't cross the demilitarized zone in Vietnam. Going on to Afghanistan and Iraq, you have to meet these conditions before you can fire back. I mean, what possible reason could there be? Try to speculate for why permission would be denied to fire at Taliban forces in a war that is openly going on, in which they are heavily armed, we are heavily armed. Why would permission have been denied in this case? Do we know?
Well, you're very correct about the origin of the law of war. They're rooted in moral issues. Obviously, they're rooted in practical issues. You can go all the way back to the Bible for rules of engagement, where the Hebrews are told not to cut down trees when you besiege a city, et cetera, et cetera. So we have codified those, if you correctly indicated, in the law, in the laws of war have been codified. They're adopted by all civilized nations. It's the behavior that you use. The rules of engagement are strictly political ideas, and they really got their start in the Korean War, but they went into what I call supercilious rules of engagement, where, great analogy, you tie one hand behind the back of your fighters and tell them to go out and do your job, and that's no way to win a war. I think the premise is that somehow individuals have a disorientation to reality about how do you win a war. They think that you win a war by being nice to the enemy and they'll return the favor and be nice to you. We want to win the hearts and the minds of the civilians and those types of issues. The more reasonable approach to the law of war, and again, this is in Catholic just law theory, is that you get the war over as quickly as possible. Now, you don't target civilians in the law of war, you target the enemy. But if you're going to win a war, you got to do three things. You got to identify the enemy, identify their center of gravity, and kill them. That's how you win a war. Otherwise, as we've seen in Afghanistan, we've been there for 20 years and have not won the war.
When we come back, I want to ask Jeffrey Addicott about some of the wider issues affecting U.S. foreign policy, and in particular, what is the single greatest threat facing America in the world today? We'll be back.